A major decision. The Supreme Court issues a ruling on the Trump administration's attempt to end DACA protections. We have a report and analysis. Eye on law enforcement. Lawmakers continue to debate how best to enact police reform. We're on Capitol Hill. Family visit. Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI leaves Italy for the first time in years. We'll tell you why. And global pandemic. An update on the Vatican task force convened to address the coronavirus crisis. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, June 18th, 2020. Good evening and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. The president wanted it gone. The Supreme Court said no. The High Court has rejected President Donald Trump's effort to end deferred action for childhood arrivals, also known as DACA. It protects young immigrants known as dreamers brought to the U.S. illegally as children. All this as the president fends off highly charged accusations made in a new book. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports now. Owen?
Tracy, here at the White House, President Trump heads to Tulsa in a few days for a campaign rally. He'll have plenty to talk about, no doubt, including that Bolton book and a Supreme Court rebuke. Do you get the impression that the Supreme Court doesn't like me? President Donald Trump tweeting after the High Court's ruling, which means young immigrants can stay in the U.S. and keep working without fear of deportation.
Immigrants' rights are under attack. What do we do?
The president also tweets, these horrible and politically charged decisions coming out of the Supreme Court are shotgun blasts into the face of people that are proud to call themselves Republicans or conservatives. Vote Trump 2020. And House Speaker Nancy Pelosi was dreading which way the decision would go.
If it goes this way, if it goes that way. But this way is the American way, and we're very proud of it.
The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops welcomes the DACA decision, telling young immigrants, we will continue to accompany you and your families. You are a vital part of our church and our community of faith. And we urge the president to strongly reconsider terminating DACA. Immigrant communities are really hurting now amidst COVID-19, and moving forward with this action needlessly places many families into further anxiety and chaos. Meanwhile, the White House lashes out at the 577-page John Bolton book packed with accusations slamming the president.
He is a misguided hawk on foreign policy and a weak dove of an author, and this is despicable that he chose to publish this book without fully going through the review process. In
it, President Trump's one-time national security advisor allegedly accuses the president of trying to get China to help him win re-election.
No president has been tougher on China than President Trump.
The book comes out Tuesday, unless a federal lawsuit delays publication. President Trump tweeting, Bolton's book is a compilation of lies and made-up stories, just trying to get even for firing him like the sick puppy he is.
It's still undergoing the review process. We take classified information seriously. John Bolton apparently does not, and this was absolutely appalling that he chose to do this.
Bolton also alleges every decision President Trump makes is based on his own re-election. As for DACA, it was a 5-4 decision. John Roberts voting in the majority along with the liberal members on the court. Tracy?
White House correspondent Owen Jensen reporting for us tonight. Thank you so much, Owen. And joining me now on Skype with her analysis of today's decision is Amy Howe, co-founder of SCOTUS blog. Amy, welcome back. Good to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
Amy, can you break down for us the basis for today's court ruling?
Sure. So by a vote of 5-4, the Supreme Court said there's not really any dispute among the parties to this case, the federal government on the one hand and then the challengers on the other hand, that the federal government, the Trump administration, could decide to end the program known as DACA. And the question before the Supreme Court was whether or not they went about it the right way. And the answer today from 5 justices, the Chief Justice John Roberts and the court's 4 more liberal justices, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Stephen Breyer, Sonia Sotomayor, and Elena Kagan, was that the Trump administration had not. The Supreme Court said there's a pretty low bar when we're looking at something that a federal agency like the Department of Homeland Security has done, but they haven't met this bar. They said the Trump administration said that it wanted to end DACA because it believed that the program was illegal, because it gave the DACA recipient benefits like the right to work in the country legally, the right to access Medicare or have Social Security, but it didn't look at other factors. It didn't consider other factors like whether or not it could still allow them to remain in the country, which was a central part of the DACA program, and whether or not the DACA recipients had relied on the DACA program when deciding whether or not to end the program. And so, in essence, it sent the dispute, the question about terminating DACA, back to the Department of Homeland Security for a do-over.
Yeah, Amy, Justice Clarence Thomas said in his dissent, the majority's ruling must be recognized for what it is and an effort to avoid politically controversial but legally correct decision. What are your thoughts on that?
So Clarence Thomas, in a dissenting opinion, mostly dissenting opinion that was joined by Justice Samuel Alito and Justice Neil Gorsuch, said the decision to implement DACA was illegal, and an agency doesn't really need to explain itself at all if it is undoing an illegal agency action. That should be enough in and of itself.
Chief Justice Roberts talked in the past about his desire to keep the Supreme Court from appearing political, and he's receiving a lot of criticism, that is, for siding with the liberal justices. What do you think about that?
So this decision actually reminded me a lot of the decision involving the census just around this time last year, when the Chief Justice joined, again, the court's former liberal justices in holding that the Trump administration couldn't include a question about citizenship on the 2020 census. And in that case, the Supreme Court said it's not that they can't include the question, but they didn't go about it in the right way. And so, the Chief Justice wasn't necessarily telling the Trump administration that it couldn't do something, but he was telling them that they really needed to cross their T's and dot their I's and and how they went about it. So I think some people obviously view that as sort of a political decision to reach a result that many conservatives sharply disagree with.
Amy, before we let you go, we still have some more decisions ahead. What are you watching out for from the court right now?
Sure. We've had two major decisions from the Supreme Court this week, but we still have several more to come, including a decision involving a challenge to a Louisiana abortion law. We have a pair of decisions involving efforts by Congress and a New York district attorney to get access to the president's financial records. We have a decision involving the Electoral College and a decision involving sort of the constitutionality of how the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is structured. So it's also a decision involving school choice for religious schools in Montana. So we've had two big decisions this week, but there's still a fair amount left to come over the next couple of weeks.
Well, Amy, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate your analysis. Amy Howell, co-founder of Scotus Blog. Thank you again, Amy.
Thanks for having me.
Late last night, the House Judiciary Committee approved the Justice in Policing Act, the Democrats' plan for police reform. The bill now goes to the House floor, where members are expected to vote on it next Thursday. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports. Eric?
Well, Tracy, the Democratic bill passed the committee without any Republican support. Now the real work begins of bringing two separate plans together into one comprehensive police reform bill. But first, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi made the announcement today that she's removing several portraits of Confederate leaders from inside the Capitol. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is calling for the removal of historic portraits on display in Washington.
I have sent a letter, she will see, to the clerk of the House, directing the clerk to remove the portraits of 4 previous speakers of the House who served in the Confederacy.
Republican leader Kevin McCarthy says All 4 portraits are of Democratic speakers. He says today's Democrats need to reconsider the history of the Democratic Party itself.
So if the speaker's concerned about that, I think she should be really concerned about the history of her party.
Meanwhile, the debate continues as both parties take steps to enact federal police reform. The House Democrats' Justice and Policing Act goes to the floor next week with a vote expected Thursday. Democrats say that their plan has teeth and the plan by Republicans in the Senate does not.
We need to take action that is real. And as mentioned in our legislation, we have strong provisions that ban chokeholds, that ban racial profiling, that ban no-knock warrants.
Republicans, led by Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina, counter.
I think this package speaks very clearly to the young person who's concerned when he's stopped by the law enforcement officers. We see you.
I spoke with Democratic Senator Dick Durbin. The majority whip tells me that he knows Republicans have drawn a line in the sand with regards to qualified immunity. Now, qualified immunity is the legal doctrine that protects officers from civil suits. Now, but the senator does tell me that he's confident a compromise can be reached. Tracy?
All right. Thank you, Eric. Correspondent Eric Rosales reporting from Capitol Hill tonight. This morning's weekly unemployment report shows another 1.5 million people applied for jobless benefits last week. But the figures from the Labor Department show unemployment claims have fallen for 11 straight weeks since peaking at 7 million back in March. Additionally, the number of people getting unemployment checks fell slightly. This as many workers are returning to their jobs. The last surviving sibling of John F. Kennedy, the only Catholic U.S. president, passed away last night. Jean Kennedy Smith was a former ambassador to Ireland and was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Obama in 2011. She was known as the Quiet Kennedy and for her work with children with disabilities. Her daughter says she died at her home in Manhattan. Jean Kennedy Smith was 92 years old. Coming up, an update on the work being done by the coronavirus task force launched by Pope Francis. India says it is using diplomatic channels to de-escalate a military standoff with China after deadly clashes earlier this week. 20 Indian soldiers died while no shots were fired. They fought with clubs and rocks in hand-to-hand combat. Today, protesters in India burned a Chinese flag, and some companies in India are calling for a boycott of Chinese goods. In France today, President Emmanuel Macron marks the anniversary of the appeal to resist the Nazis in World War II. Macron visited a memorial to wartime leader General Charles de Gaulle. 80 years ago today, he delivered his defiant broadcast urging his nation to fight on despite the fall of France. It is considered as the birth of the French resistance. British Red aeroplanes and French military jets zoomed over Paris to mark today's anniversary. The COVID-19 outbreak in China appears to be declining, and Disneyland in Hong Kong reopens after a drop in infections. But cases are still rising in Europe, with Portugal and Croatia reporting new infections. In Germany, over 650 people tested positive at one of the country's biggest slaughterhouses. Everyone there had tested negative last month. Schools are now closed in Germany until summer vacation starts later this month. The Vatican created a task force in March to address the global pandemic, and while much of Europe and the rest of the world is slowly reopening, the Holy See Group continues its work. Joining us now is the member of the task force, Father Augusto Zampini, Adjunct Secretary of the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development, and he joins us now from Rome. Father, welcome back.
Pleasure to have you, or to be with you, and thank you for inviting me.
Well, countries are beginning to reopen slowly. What do you make of these decisions?
Well, the reopening of countries is tricky. No? I don't envy any of the governors at the moment, because they are in between reopening to promote again to restart the economy, or to keep the people safe. So what we discovered in the task force is that there are ways of keeping or looking after people and resuming a better economy, not to regenerate society, as Pope Francis said, but has to be done with a lot of participation on the basis of business people, on leaders and political leaders, but they have to take very, very tough decisions, and that's what the Pope wants the task force is to help them and to remind them that not everything is just about numbers, that the economy is about the organization of the house, and the house is full of people.
Well, Father, I know last month your task force said the pandemic was causing a crisis for the hungry. Can you give us an update on if this issue has been addressed?
Yes, it's still an enormous risk. One thing that we discover is the COVID has increases some of the problems of the world. One of them is the food security. So there's a lot of people dying because of hunger or around food issues. Millions of people every year, but this increases this risk. And so one of the things that countries have to do, and countries together, this is an opportunity of countries to come together to tackle this issue and to ensure that the production and the food supply chain is not disrupted, to stop fighting against each other, to fight the virus and to allow people to eat, and to redesign the food production and redistribution. Because if people cannot eat, they cannot be healthy. And if with unhealthy people, we cannot tackle the virus.
Father, finally, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on things that could have been done better, that is, or how to handle any future pandemics?
So one of the things that that is obvious that we need to learn, we must learn, is the investment in health infrastructure. And there's no public health system or private health system in the world that can cope with a pandemic. There's no one. So the only way of preventing this from happening is investing in research, investing in vaccines, investing also in public health systems, and allow the people to receive the outcomes of this investment and these services. It's an opportunity for Catholics to remind everybody about this notion of the common good, that we are all sons and daughters of our God, who has created in his image and likeness. So one of the things that we can say is, listen, if we want to prevent another pandemic, we need to work together for the good of all and not for the good of some. And it's impossible to work for the good of all without very strong public health systems, but not just the health systems that respond to a disease, but the health systems that prevent diseases.
Absolutely. Father, thank you so much for your time today and your input. We really appreciate it. Father Augusto Zampini, Adjunct Secretary of the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. And have a good day or a good evening if you're here in Europe.
Well, the Vatican says it will continue its efforts on climate change even without the United States. Archbishop Paul Gallagher, the Holy See's Secretary for Relations with States, says humanity, quote, will not be blown off course by one country's decision. He was speaking at a news conference to mark 5 years since Pope Francis released Laudato Si', his letter on the environment. Archbishop Gallagher added that he would welcome a U.S. return to the Paris Agreement on climate change. Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI makes a private visit to Germany today to see his brother whose health is deteriorating. It's believed to be the Pope Emeritus' first trip outside of Italy since his resignation from the papacy in 2013. His 96-year-old brother, Monsignor Gregor Ratzinger, was a longtime choir master. The Vatican says Benedict will spend the necessary time in Germany. Up next, a bishop in England says there is a sign of hope amid the coronavirus crisis. We'll explain. The nation's oldest Roman Catholic law school establishes its own religious liberty clinic. In a statement describing the importance of the groundbreaking initiative at Notre Dame Law School, Dean G. Marcus Cole says in part, without freedom of conscience to believe and then to live our lives as our beliefs require us, nothing else matters. Professor Stephanie Barclay has been selected to launch and lead the Notre Dame Religious Liberty Clinic, and she joins us now by Skype. Stephanie, welcome back to the show, and congratulations on your new position. That's wonderful news.
Thank you, Tracy, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely. As a First Amendment scholar, let's talk about the significance of this effort in support of religious freedom at a Catholic law school, and also why do this now?
Well, I think that Notre Dame Law School recognizes what an important issue this is. As you noted, Dean Marcus Cole said that without the freedom to believe and to live your life consistent with that belief, nothing else matters. Notre Dame is really, I think, positioned to be a natural leader in this national dialogue that is taking place right now about the importance of religious liberty. And I'm excited to be a part of that and to contribute to an initiative that will focus on equipping the next generation to defend the vital right that is religious liberty.
Stephanie, I know you'll be preparing the next generation of lawyers who will protect and defend religious freedom. What do you see as their biggest challenge and also an opportunity?
Well, in my career, I've had the opportunity to defend lots of different types of groups or individuals facing challenges with religious liberty. I've defended Native Americans who had their sacred burial grounds bulldozed. I've defended a Muslim woman who was discriminated against for wearing a religious headscarf, and the Little Sisters of the Poor before the United States Supreme Court. And in all of these cases, the common theme that is at stake for these people is the ability to live their lives consistent with their most deeply held convictions, whether that takes them to a place of faith or of no faith at all. And I think a challenge, but also an opportunity for these students is learning about that important principle and help explaining to others and preserving this principle that is important to the dignity of everyone, whether religious or not.
Well, recent restrictions related to the COVID-19 pandemic have also placed restrictions on in-person worship. What are your thoughts on that as you've watched it play out? And also, I'd like to get your thoughts on the lawsuits that were filed in response to those restrictions.
Sure. Well, there's no question that we're facing difficult times right now, not the least of which is the worldwide pandemic that we're dealing with. And certainly, safeguards are needed to protect public health. But when we're seeing government officials allowing gatherings for individuals to exercise freedom of speech rights and to participate in important protests that we've seen recently, it's a double standard when the government doesn't allow people to gather for other First Amendment religious reasons. And when we see government allowing non-essential businesses to open up and offer retail therapy, it's unconstitutional when the government won't allow people to gather for spiritual therapy. And really what is the underlying principle in a lot of these conflicts is that religious liberty is not the eccentric uncle of the human rights family. It's an important right that government needs to, at the very least, treat in an even-handed way when it comes to the way it's regulating its citizens.
Well, Stephanie, thank you so much for coming on and speaking to us. We really appreciate it. And also, congratulations on your new appointment. Very exciting. Stephanie Barclay, Associate Professor of Law at Notre Dame Law School. Thanks again, Stephanie.
Thank you.
And finally tonight, a bishop in the UK is hailing the restoration of a cross on top of his cathedral as a sign of hope during the coronavirus pandemic. The cross is made of wrought iron and represents an early example of the work of the arts and crafts movement of the 19th century. But it was rusted and damaged. After restoration and a new paint job, the cross was reinstalled on the Cathedral of Our Lady Help of Christians and St. Peter of El Cantor in Shrewsbury, England. We thank you all for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. We're back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.